Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we're doing another installment of the weekly meta breakdown where we look at the top performing decks on the MTG Arena ladder. This video will be for standard best of one. If you're looking for best of three standard, historic, explorer, timeless, tiny leaders, Kamigawa, block tribal. Actually, it was kind of funny because we had Khan's block tribal as midweek magic this week, but we try to cover every format and best of one, best of three each week. As much as the data is available. And speaking of data, we get the data from UntappedGG, what you see on the screen. Companion tool that runs alongside Arena's client. Tracks your win rates, aggregates with other users, gives us cool stats, looks at trends, gives us a good snapshot in terms of popularity and winningness of decks. Link is in the video description if you want to get started with Untapped today. Let them know I sent you, and then I will paste all these deck lists, timestamp them. So if you don't want to hear me talk, you can just jump to the deck list. If you do want to hear me talk, explain the decks, go from there. For standard best of one, I'm going to start off with saying I'm struggling a bit to find kind of new innovative decks. I usually will try to scour, whether it be community decks, tournament decks, ladder decks, as much as I want to present mono red for the 9,227th time. I do try to find, new decks, innovation, stuff like that. This format's kind of boring. I'm not going to lie. Especially coming from Timeless where, it's just a new format. Yes, common cards are getting played a lot, but there's so many. I did, the best of one for Timeless, and I did 12 decks, a 30-minute video, and there's still more decks I could have featured. So something to just keep in mind. There's also this kind of preconceived notion Timeless is more expensive. Yes, the acquisition of cards is more difficult because they're not standard legal. There's some complexity with the cards as well. But there are decks where, there's a mono red burn deck that's 8 wild cards more than standard mono red. And that will eventually lead you into decks like Rakdos Burn, Rakdos Midrange, Blood Moon decks over time. So don't let that kind of discourage you. I think the format's very fun. Something to check out as well if you are getting a little burnt out of standard right now. I do see a little bit more innovation in the best of three space with standard RCQ season coming up. There's going to be a lot more testing in this space, so hopefully we get some new innovation there that kind of leaches its way into best of one. But a deck that's been picking up popularity is these Rakdos kind of ramped into Breach the Multiverse decks with Rampaging Carnosaur, or whatever the Carnosaur is. Not seeing that translate to best of one, as best of one tends to be more in the extremes of hyper aggro or hard control. So my thoughts kind of going in. I welcome your thoughts as well. What are you thinking of this standard format? I know we've touched base on the 3-year rotation, and I've been a staunch disliker of it. But let me know for those of you who are more enfranchised standard players at this time. So we are starting off popularity of the day. As always, popular decks doesn't necessarily correlate to highest win rate decks. And most popular deck is Mono Red Aggro, 18%. Notably, we've seen a huge drop in Mono White down to 5%. This is Diamond to Mythic rank. This was usually toe-in-toe with Mono Red, so really interesting to see how much Mono White has fallen off here. Azorius Control, just a shade under 10%. Selesnya Enchantments, kind of holding their top 3 position for the last couple weeks. Have Mono Black Aggro in here, Golgari Midrange, Esper Control, and then Gruul Dinosaurs. So speaking of popularity, we could see Mono White 23%, kind of fell down to 8 to 10, peaked back up to 22, and we're just seeing it peak up again. So December 3rd, 3 weeks ago, they were toe-in-toe, and now it's just kind of deteriorated in. So it's really interesting to see that kind of dynamic. We are seeing Selesnya Enchantments slightly increase, Mono Red's kind of held strong, and then we're seeing some variation with this Boros Aggro deck kind of mixed into there. So we are going to look Diamond to Mythic rank, 150,000. Actually, you know what? This one here, I actually did Mythic only. Sorry. I was trying to find more unique decks. We're looking Mythic to Mythic only, and it's 55,000 games. Let's see if there's anything dramatically different. Kind of the same. Selesnya jumps Azorius Control, but a little bit tighter at the top, and then kind of flatter with a bunch of 4 and 5%. So nothing too extravagantly different. We see kind of the same with Mono White, where beginning of the month or in October, 34%, and just a very stark decline in the deck itself. So we are going to jump in. The highest win rate deck is Selesnya Enchantments at 65% win rate. And this has been pretty stock for some time. I was playing this over the summer, and the deck is very similar. I was running wedding announcements at the time. I've qualified a couple of months when I was doing the top 1200 push with the variations of this deck, and you're using artifact or enchantment tribal kind of themes in the sense of like whenever you cast an enchantment, Generous Visitor puts counters, the Kami gets bigger, you can double up triggers with Weaver of Harmony, Calyx puts counters on things, get a cost reduction from Jukai Naturalist. Kind of the combo, if you would, is get something very large, either Kami Naturally Trample or something with Audacity on it, Mashiko it, push through a bunch of damage. Catilda also can be used as an enchantment to give evasion, or itself has evasion. I've been kind of on the banging the drum of play 3 Calyx, play 2 Catildas, with mono red being prevalent. Catilda helps in terms of racing and also just being a big wall. This mana base is very simple. Usually with ossifications you can get away with 10. So you can go up to the full Razor Verge Thicket. You can also play either Beseju and a Ganjo in here, or you can play some brush lands over the other overgrown farm lands. You don't need 16 lands. 10 is usually sufficient with ossification in the deck. So just little things to consider there. There's Azorius Control. This is the next highest win rate deck at 61%. And this deck is predominantly base white. It features everyone's favorite exile sweepers and just sweepers galore. So we got Farewell, we got Sunfall, we got Vanquish the Horde. So just a whole bunch of different sweepers, predominantly exile based, which is relevant. Wandering Emperor, Temporary Lockdown. I will say this version of Azorius Control is well built, in my opinion, for best of one. A lot of times people port these decks in, and the configuration of how you would build an Azorius Control deck in best of 3 is going to be dramatically different than how you build it for best of 1. In best of 3, you're going to have more counters main, you're going to anticipate more like domain decks, bigger mana decks, stuff like that at times, as well as a higher representation of Esper midrange. Whereas in best of 1, you're going to anticipate a little bit more aggressive based deck. So main boarding Elspeth Smites, March of the Otherworldly Lights, combination of Get Lost, Soul Partition, and then Sunset Revelry, a card that would be more prevalent in sideboards in best of 3, coming in the main in this deck. Some Celestis to help you ramp, and then Jace, Wandering Emperor is your primary win conditions, a couple Sunfall tokens, as well as the Restless Anchorage in your mana base. No Myrex notably in this list. Finally, that mono red aggro deck at 61%. So we've seen kind of different variations. See the full Witchstalker Frenzy, or at least 3 of in this deck. I've liked this kind of configuration. I have this deck actually built in paper if I do play in the RC. For Standard, I'm on a combination of Nahiri Warcrafting and Witchstalker in the main, but again, in best of 3, the way you configure your deck is going to be different than best of 1. I will say in best of 1, you're probably going to want the full set of Play with Fires. It's just useful in these creature mirrors, also just higher prevalence of like more copies of these aggro decks you're running into. I think Shivan Devastator is kind of a trap card. It's kind of slow. It goes over the top. It's not bad like against Domain or stuff like that, but it's often kind of below rate in terms of the effect. It's got flexibility, but I don't love this card. I would rather play with Fire, or like even like another Phoenix Chick, another or another Bloodthirsty Adversary, because we're seeing like 3 of, only 1 Feldon. I think in best of 1, 2 Feldons is sufficient. In best of 3, I would only play 1. And again, that's kind of an ode to you're anticipating more creature-based decks, so that generally there'll be more combat damage or burn-based damage to kill it, so you get the card advantage. In best of 3, there's Leyline Binding, there's exile effects, so it plays a little bit different. Go for the throat, stuff of that nature. Then go to Gruul Aggro, Gruul Picnic, and this one's at 59%, just a shade under 60. So this is kind of the Sly deck. So you're playing cheap creatures, Monastery Swiftspear, Questing Druid, Yavimaya Iconoclast, Picnic Ruiner, and then you're suiting them up. Ancestral Anger gives them Pumps and Trample and draws you card. Power and Trample. Cacophony Scamp is kind of a combo here where you can deal a bunch of damage to your opponent and then sacrifice it for if it deals damage, and then deal even more damage. Giant Growth in the year 2023, almost 24 is in here. Mirren Battles, Bane Splitter, Words Are Tough. Another kind of effect like that. So just trying to pump up your creatures. Picnic Ruiner can also get double strike, which works nicely with the trample style effects. Then go to 4-color domain, and this has been stock for some time. This is going to be your run-of-the-mill kind of ramp deck. Topiary Stomper, Invasion of Zendikar help you ramp. Herd Migration for some life gain and gets you a land. Virtue for some life gain and removal. Leyline Bindings, basically a 1-mana removal spell in this deck. Sun Falls, and then you win with Archangel of Wraths and Atraxas. In this best of 1 version, they haven't really adapted to Cavern of Souls in the mana base. It seems in best of 3, a lot of them are shifting that route because both Atraxa as well as Archangel of Wrath are both angels. So it helps against post-board games where they would bring in something like Disdainful Stroke. Beanstalks for some card advantage. Briefcase for some more card advantage, or ramp in that case. Also can be card advantage. If you flood out, you can drop 3 cards with it. Then go to Boros Aggro. 56.9. So it's kind of a mashup. So this is very similar to the concept of the Pioneer Explorer Convoke deck. You're using things like Voldaren Aperture or Yodian Frontliner to produce artifacts. Yodian being an artifact itself. Gleeful Demolition will allow you to create 3 tokens if you sack it. You can tap those tokens to Warden or any other type of token enablers. Resolute Reinforcement lets you go wide. Regal Bunnycorn lets you go tall. Charming Scoundrel can either kind of loot for you, create another token, or give you a Wicked token. Then you have Imidane that powers up your squad, gives them haste. Sanguine Evangelist powers up your squad and gives you multiple bodies. And then Knight Aaron of Eos, a lot of cheap ways to convoke and power it up. The Boros mana base is pretty bad for aggro in Standard. You're playing Sundown Pass and you're forced to play Thran Portal to have enough untapped lands. So that's one of the kind of the shortcomings, because you don't have the Vantage, the fast line, Inspiring Vantage in this current Standard set. Then move to Rakdos Midrange. So this is kind of the Breach version. We're seeing some... Actually, I mentioned on the onset, it didn't really translate, but it looks like it is. My mistake there. I was trying to look... When I was looking to find other decks, a lot of these records were best of 3 from like other avenues. But this deck is going to feature a bunch of removal and ramp. So Go for the Throats, Edicts, Brotherhood's End, Burn Down the House, all kind of deals with early stuff. Virtue Persistence. And that's offset with things like Iron Crag, Celestis to kind of get you ahead. Big Score can let you ramp up as well. That lets you turn potentially, so you go, say turn 3 to be subtle. So turn 3, you do this, you do that on turn 4, so turn 5 still. Technically turn 4 maybe if you have Iron Crag, but it's only a 1-of. Shieldry gains you a bunch of life, and then you could Atali Breach, double it as well, the Breach with Chandra out. Then go to Golgari Midrange. Deck that's largely fallen off. Even in best of 3 hasn't been doing great recently. But you're just using a bunch... Similar concept with removal, but this version... I think if you want to go these midrange decks, this Rakdos version is better because Breach and Atali are just huge payoffs as well as Chandra. Where this is like 1-for-1ing a lot. So you have Anoint with Affliction, Cut Downs as removal, Go for the Throats. Deep Cavern Bats, pretty nice as just a combat, or like... Thoughtseize-esque type effect. I like this better in Esper because Rafine pumps it up so you can scales and gets larger. Monster Dread Knight's kind of the big draw along with Glissa to play these colors. Card advantage, kind of sticky threat, or like difficult to remove threats or just painful threats. We have 3 Sentinels in here for some card advantage through the Explore and map tokens. Schism as a way to either create tokens or draw you cards. Lily's in here. There's a Gix for some card advantage. Tortoise to kind of ramp you. And then your top end, you got like a Gix Command, Virtue, and Nissa as well. So it's a little bit more creature fair, where I think the Rakdos version just having a bit more removal. The downside with this Rakdos version is if you're running into like dedicated control, you have a lot of dead cards. Go for the Throats. Like Edict is fine, but I guess with Burn Down and Brotherhoods, they can hit Planeswalkers, so maybe not, all things considered. In any case, last deck, Mono White Humans. Again, this was a deck that's frequently in the past towards the top, and we've seen in both the popularity of the deck and the win rate significantly drop. Could be correlated, you know, if the deck's not performing well, you're going to see the numbers that being played also drop. This version here is on some Lunarch Veterans for some life gain in the creature mirrors. Coppercoat Vanguard and Intrepid Adversary, the full set as your kind of pseudo lord effects, a couple spellbook vendors as Luminarch Aspirant at home, not as good, but provides some utility with the sorcerer tokens. Thalia for tax, Adeline for tokens, Brutal Cathar as removal, Knight Errant of Eos. This version is really on only for removal spells, so a little bit lighter in that respect. So that's it for the week. Let me know what you think, if you've been enjoying Standard, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.